Hello.
I was like, it didn't fade out. Wait a minute. Justin ended it early. He caught me off guard. Hey, everybody. Today, I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works.
Just today you are.
It's not what it says, but I know what I am. Now, I'm Jeff with Fuller Embroidery Works. We have Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and we will be going over super wide satins and options for when you have super wide satin. I saw the picture that prompted this, and I'm curious, Justin, if you actually know what the measurement on that thing was.
Let me see.
He's like, no, I don't.
Offhand, I don't, but I think I have that information. Let me see here.
It was pretty wide, if I had to say so myself. But if you guys are watching, let us know where you're watching from, and we will definitely have a chat. If you guys have questions, drop those in as well. We have Cindy joining us. Hello, how are you doing today? Hopefully it's not too hot where you are. I know that you live in Texas, and it is brutally hot in Iowa at the moment. So I can't imagine how hot it is in Texas. And Justin doesn't really count because it's always hot in Arizona.
Yeah, we're at a cool 103 or something today.
A cool 103. Do you ever just be outside, or is it just too hot all the time?
Not in the summer, no.
No, in the winter maybe you can enjoy some
exactly
summertime-ish weather for the rest of us.
Exactly.
Oof.
So the overall size of that one is 7.5, but we'll get it called up here.
7. Oh, the overall size, so like the height.
Yeah, so overall width of the text is 7.5. So
width of the text.
Just 90 in Texas right now. Wow. But
yeah,
the difference of you in Texas is you have the humidity, though. We don't, unless it's the monsoon season. So I don't.
I mean, humidity is just. I don't like humidity at all. To be honest with you, it's not my favorite thing. We live in Iowa, and the heat is it's manageable because I moved from Utah. It's about the same, but it's humid here, and it's the humidity that just kills me. It feels like walking outside into a sauna. I don't like going outside in the summer during the day.
We got John coming in from Fort Collins.
Hello,
John. My daughter lives out near there, outside of Denver, so she's probably enjoying the nice weather there as well. But yeah, we're talking about wide stitches. So there's always that, especially when you're doing 3D puff designs, you're trying to achieve those big, bold, bulky letters. And there's that cap where the communication between the software and the machine is going to actually trigger your trim codes.
Mm-hmm.
I know I try to keep right around 10 millimeters wide as the widest point when I'm dealing with 3D puff. Most machines, it's at 12 millimeters that are going to trigger that trim code. So you try to stay under that 12. I know there's just certain machines out there that'll push it past that, but 12 is probably the sweet spot. Before you get the trim code, that issue in itself can be a problem where it's just trimming when the length is too long. But
right, and generally that is, I want to say that's output in the software is generally when that trim code comes fired out, because it's when you start getting to about 12 millimeters in your software, it's going to recognize it. It's going to say, hey, this is too long for a stitch. I'm not going to let this be a stitch. And there are tricks and ways to adjust your software so you can get out there and you can get longer. But I mean, let's be honest, a 12 millimeter stitch or longer is, I mean, it'll lay down nice and it'll look great on your sample until you move it. And now you've just got, the second you bend it in any direction, now you've got this really long, loose thread. And I'm going to go to a view that we can see that a little bit bigger, Justin. We'll just see you bigger. That's okay. There we go. So you're sharing your whole screen. You're going to have to make that.
There we go.
There you go. Yep. So you start getting into those really loose, loopy threads, especially when you start bending it. And that's why when you see longer stitches on puff hats, because they don't get abraded as much as Something I'm looking at that and imagining that that's probably on the back of a jacket,
It's safety vest. So
safety vest.
yeah.
So it's going to get some heavy use.
Hmm.
You can already see that the white thread on the top is dirty and looping and snagging.
Right.
And that's why with longer stuff like that, we tend to try and keep that stuff shorter.
Correct. Yeah. So getting away, even if you're falling under that threshold where you're going to start getting the trim codes, which I did a quick measurement on this, and it does fall under that, but you still have that longer stitch, which is going to have a tendency, especially on outerwear, something that you are wearing a lot, maybe putting your back against seats and chairs and stuff like that, washing a lot is where you're going to start getting this unraveling, the looping. It can get caught on something, snagged on something very easily because those wide stitches, there's nothing, keeping it against that garment besides the two end points. So eventually your embroidery is going to look like this.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I always pictured, I used to work at Walmart back in the day, and you would lean against the walls were concrete. So you'd lean against those concrete wall, and you could always feel it just pulling on your shirt when you pull away from it.
right. Yeah, definitely. You get that snagging. And one little snag, I mean, it can definitely ruin the look of the embroidery and or make it start even unraveling even more, depending on if you break a stitch or something like that. So I'm going to move this to the side here. So yeah, doing some measurements. I'll even put it down to the size we were talking about that it was. Just taking it down to 7.5. Coming in here, we're going to do some measurements, and then the widest stitches, yeah, you're just out about at 11 millimeters wide. So, of course, the fact that this was sewn, obviously, these weren't triggering the trim codes on the machine, but it's definitely, uh,
It definitely ran slow.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, even getting back to that whole pushing the 12 millimeters. If anybody's sewn, stitches that long, you get that nice ka-chunk sound that you're going to get uh, when that needle's bouncing back and forth. 12 millimeters wide, and it's really ka-chunking that machine. So not a pleasant sound, I'll tell you that much.
No, it's always one that even when I'm running a job and I know that it's going to do that and I'm sitting there, I hear that and I always turn around and look.
Right.
The first one.
Yep. Exactly. Same here. Um, so yeah, I mean, working with wider satins, not to say that you can't get away with wide satins, especially on headwear, you could probably get away with a little bit more because it isn't something that's rubbing on things as you're wearing them. You don't typically launder them, um, but in situations like this, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach it. So I went ahead and just pulled up a stock font and let's bring that down to the general size that we're working with on there.
Honestly, that looks like a stock font, and it doesn't look. No, it doesn't look like they adjusted it for push and pull at all.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's a stock font myself. Just you could just kind of tell the way the pieces are put together that it is a stock font. Um, so quick and easy, a stock font when you in Wilcom when you pull up a stock font, it's going to come out as satin stitches. So doing it the size that we're at, doing a quick little measurement, and going to the points. Corners are always going to have the longest stitches to them. As you can see, like the horizontal piece is about a little over 7 millimeters. When you get to that angled piece, it's just about 11 millimeters. So you are working with those really long stitches there. So in Wacom, the quickest and easiest way of doing this is you could actually just go ahead and turn it into oops, is just applying a tatami fill. And what that's going to do, it's actually going to turn it into a complex turning fill. Um, I've heard it be called a satin fill, where the elements themselves, you can see the elements are still the individual satin pieces, but the stitch type itself has now been turned into a tatami stitch. So that's just a nice, quick, easy way of flattening it out to make sure that the stitches now are kind of laying against the material in a fill stitch pattern. Um, You'd want to go ahead and treat it as a fill and kind of do underlays with edge runs and a tatami underlay.
And you want to make sure too when you're checking these, especially when it comes to these turning fills, because I've seen in cases, and I'm not going to say that this is happening right now, but when you put a tatami underlay, you want to make sure that it's opposing the direction of the stitches.
Right.
You
Right.
don't want to put it in the same direction because it's kind of going to defeat the purpose of putting it there if it's running in the exact same direction.
Exactly. And that's one of the downfalls of using, just going to a straight, applying an tatami fill to the individual pieces of the satins like this is, not only it's not all one stitch direction, as you can see, since it is a complex fill, it is going to be following the same stitch angles as the satins were. Another drawback to them is if you see the junctions where the satins are perpendicular to each other, if the one going underneath, like you can see here, the bottom of the T is going first, and it's going underneath that horizontal part of the T, you're going to get those areas where the stitches are getting pulled apart. So the satin stitches that are going left and right and creating that fill that's vertical, when that horizontal part of the T gets sewn, it's going to grab the top few layers of stitches and it's going to pull it apart. So you can see it a lot here. You can kind of see it here in the F. So that's one other drawback of just simply just applying that tatami fill to it.
And that's something that can happen with just regular satin letters as well without just doing a tatami fill.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's, what would I call it? Tips. There's tricks to disguise it, to hide it, to minimize it.
Yeah, you can add some bridges similar to what you use in 3D Puff in those intersections to make sure that the foam doesn't come through. You use bridges in those, but you could also use a bridge that has maybe a little bit more density to kind of, not only kind of cover that area, to, in case there is any gappage in there, that under satin is going to not allow that material to show through. There's a couple of different things where you can kind of try, where the satin kind of sews over itself a second time, kind of overlap to fortify that area where those junctions hit. But overall, yeah, the angles themselves, because they are fill stitches now, you really want to come in here and be aware of how they kind of turn the corners and make sure that these corners aren't turning too sharply. Because they are fill stitches, you might get some tight corners in there and getting kind of a buildup of thread. So you want to be really aware of the corner. You can kind of see, I'm not sure if it's showing up in your monitor, but you can kind of see that these corners get a little bit tight.
Yeah, and I don't know if it does. So when you're doing corners like this in the satin stitch, it'll do. I think they call it fractal settings. It'll shorten stitches in those corners.
Yes.
To try and stop that buildup from happening when you're turning a corner like that with a satin stitch. And I'm not sure if it does that with a fill stitch or not. I think it does the entire row, and it just keeps kind of hammering them in there. I can't see that, that's too small, so you're gonna have to confirm whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, I don't, because I'm applying the fractional, and I guess it does change a little bit. It doesn't change it as much as the satin stitches.
Okay.
You can visibly see that there's a lot of short stitches in corners when it's just straight satin. So, like Jeff was saying, if you kind of see the underlay stitches as well under here, they're kind of going the same direction as the satin stitches. So that's something you'd have to be aware of to go and change the angle of your underlay in your settings as well. Which I don't know if you even can. You can't when it's a
when it's a turning
yeah
fill.
when it's a complex fill. So there are drawbacks. But like I said, this is probably your quickest and easiest way if you're just using a stock font. You want it to lay down flat. You don't want those issues with the really long stitches. This is a really quick and easy fix, and it can work for you. I think Cindy has a comment here. Hold on.
Yeah, I can. Yep.
Yeah. Putting a script A in a cap last week since the cap was white and the black thread. I put a tatami underlay under the satin. I could not figure out why my edges look so jagged.
Yeah, it's probably that tatami underlay cutting back. It popped out on the edges.
Yeah, so tatami a little too large in the underlay. Yeah, so there's actually down here, if you can see, um, I know it's small on the screen, but down at the bottom of your underlay window, there's a margin section. And if you can see, I think it defaults to like at 0.2. But the first one here, if you change that value, I'll go ahead and change it quite a bit. I'll change it to 1. Is it that value or is it the next one?
I want to say those values affect different areas, but it doesn't seem to be moving it on that.
Oh, I was looking at the edge run. If you
Oh,
can, if you can see the edge run here, which is that line just inset there, I have an edge run as my first one, and you change that value to 1, it pulls it away from the side. So
yep.
yeah, it probably was at 0.2. Yeah, that if you can kind of see that zigzag under here, that's the underlay. Um, that changing that value does pull it away from the edges. So if you are having any type of overhang or anything bleeding outside the top stitches, you can adjust those values to kind of pull them in.
Yeah, and that's usually accentuated on caps
Exactly.
because of that curved surface. It travels a little bit less predictable. It's predictable, but it's a little bit less predictable than just
Right. And that's where, if you've ever heard Jeff and I talk about hats in our class that we've taught in Long Beach, or even just talking on the show or in the, we always preach not to use underlay, edge rock underlay, because of that fact. You can kind of pull it in all you want. You're kind of losing the effect of what edge rock is supposed to do. But on caps, because there's that variance of the curved surface, you get a lot of times where you get that little loop sticking out here and there, or a lot of places in your text, depending on the hat style and stuff. Um, so yeah, like I said, I think this is a quick and easy solve for this. You're definitely gonna get less loopage. It's not going to be easily snagged when you just go to a straight complex fill. Um, complex. I've always called it a satin fill. Complex turning is what they call it in Wacom. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, the turning is just referring to that it turns in the angles just as the satin fills do. Uh,
Yep. So let me ask this, Justin. If you were to do this, would you come out and would you start with the complex turning, or would you do it as a flat fill and outline it?
so that was my next step. So
Okay.
without flat out, of course, if this was a font which that's not a stock font, I would probably elect to recreate the artwork so I wasn't working on something like this that's picture at an angle. You've got everything that's coming into vanishing points that aren't straight. Um, it's difficult to work for, especially if it's a specific font that I'm trying to duplicate. I'd probably recreate the artwork before starting again. From digitizing from scratch, I tend to do a fill with a border. I just think it looks nicer. It's got cleaner edges. Um, Plus, you're not going to have, when you have a regular fill that's all in one direction, you're not going to have those junctions like on the T and the E and stuff where you're going to have that issue with the pulling away from the perpendicular satin. So, but quick way of showing you again, just using kind of a stock font, how you can get to that point. If you right click on your text and you break it apart, you're going to want to break apart all these. So I am actually breaking it down to elements now.
Oh, you could just select them all and do it at once.
Yeah, I was just kind of the first time you hit break apart, it's going to break apart just the letters, and they're going to actually stay as a font. So if I go back
Yep.
here, if you see in the color object list, the first time I broke it apart, it's each individual letter is still a letter in that font. It's just individual letters broken apart. So it's instead of a whole word.
And it's the same if you do a sentence, it'll break it to words, and then it'll break it to letters, and then
Exactly. Yeah.
text.
Yeah. So it'll sentences down to words to down to letters, and then the last time you break it apart, it's going to go ahead and as you can see, the the alpha or the A status is gone because now it is not an editable font. These are broken down to individual elements now uh, throughout the letters. Of course, the S is all one piece, so it's all one element now. So getting from the complex turning settings here, if you select drag and drop your box, select all the elements in one letter, and you go to your shaping tools, you could actually weld those elements together. Now, what that does now is it created all one piece. One little tip here is make sure that the all the elements that are overlapping, oops, are fully overlapping each other.
Yep.
If you have any gap, say like this is just barely touching there, um, and say one node is in there and the other one isn't underneath, they will have that gap there where those two are meeting. So just make sure when you're doing this process that all the elements are overlapping each other. And if you weld those together, it is now all one piece, but it did still keep the individual angles of the separate pieces of satins that you did weld together. So your next step is right clicking and convert to a complex fill. And now we are in the mode where it is just a single fill. You could choose your angle, and you can see the difference between this one here. The F is now a regular fill, regular complex fill, when the rest of those letters are still the complex turning. So now that we're dealing with the regular fill, I usually come in and kind of clean up the extra nodes that aren't needed throughout the shape. Because especially when you're dealing with a lot more intricate letters or elements that you're trying to do this with, there could be a lot of chatter of all these different nodes that are throughout the elements, which later down the line, when you're trying to do the automated outlines and stuff, it could kind of wreak havoc on how those things are applied. So I just like to come through and clean it all up.
Especially on letters that are very blocky. You want to
Exactly.
make sure that you clean them all up because it doesn't need as many nodes as it'll put in there sometimes.
Exactly.
You
And
run into
here's
the same thing with like curvy bits. Like I'm gonna call them like the S. It would add a lot more nodes to
oh
the S.
yeah. The S it adds a ton more nodes. I'll go through it right now. But looking at the A, like looking at these individual pieces, they're not completely lining up and they're not completely overlapping each other. So if I were to just select these and weld them, as you can see, it does some real weird stuff where it's adding. It's not really not knowing how to get handle where those elements had gaps in between them. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the top portion and line it up with the edge and kind of overlap it. Same with this side. Now I can see the two legs and the top are all overlapping each other. The horizontal piece is now completely overlapped. Now I can weld them. It's all one piece. I'm going to convert it to complex fill. Come in here and delete kind of those errant nodes. And again, this is a complex fill where I can kind of go in here, and I hate how the angle always sits on right on the nodes. So you can change that angle, and it's all one angle. So now we have these two letters here that are now into the mode of just a regular complex fill. And you can actually go over to your simple offsets, and you can choose satin C, and you can actually just easily add a satin border to it. So the difference is you have your, at this size, you have your regular satin stitches that are going to have the really wide satins, and you're going to have all the issues that we see in this example here. You have the really quick conversion when it comes to just selecting the text and applying the satin fill or the complex turning. I always forget the name of it. Complex turning, yes. But I think you have a lot more control over the quality of it and the underlay settings, adding a satin border to them, and not having to deal with all this different stitch angle lines, the overlaps where they can possibly get separations and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and it comes down to look, because I've seen where people do that complex turning, and they're going for that. They want that patterned look that's going to curve.
right,
But something like a safety vest, especially in this example, they want it to look clean. They don't want it to be too many stitches, and I think that this is probably the best way to achieve that versus just going with really wide stitches.
right. And yeah, the satin borders on the fill, I think, like I said, it always gives you a nice cleaner edge. Um, Depending on the fabric style, having the fill go all in one angle, it might distort a little bit, where a satin border can definitely hide that if you have little areas that are kind of pushing out at the ends of letters. Um, that look of this complex churning, I think, works better on things like script, because script tends to, your brain just kind of goes to the way you write script, and
Mm-hmm.
so the overlaps are kind of real apparent of how the script flows. So um, I think it does definitely looks nicer in a script type font. But big, large blocky letters like this, like safety, security, all those jacket backs that are kind of those generic big blocky letters. Um, this is definitely the way to go.
Either this or applique.
Yeah, yeah. On the flip side of that, though, when you run into maybe those letters kind of closer to what you see on this bottom one, um, the individual letters aren't as big and wide as these, but say like this was just a little bit smaller. Um, it could still be possibly wide enough that you're going to have those issues where it's going to snag or you get the looping and whatnot. But adding a nice bold satin border that's a 2 millimeter border, say, uh, the 2 millimeter border is actually taking up the majority of that inside of that letter as itself. So the letter's not wide enough to have a nice big bold fill with an outline, um, but it is too wide to kind of face these looping things. So that's where kind of the complex churning is probably your better choice. You don't have to worry about the bulkiness of a satin added width to the outline, that can possibly close in areas like the inside of the D or the inside of the R or the inside of the A in industrial. So that complex satin fill would probably be your better choice at that point.
Yeah. So You have a question here. What angle do you run your fill and what size satin border?
Typically, my fills are at 15, 20 degrees. As far as satins, it's really going to depend on the element itself. Something like this, I try to go at least 2 millimeters to kind of have that nice, bold look to it. If you can go a little wider, 2.5, 3 millimeters, I do. Um, and not only that is playing with your pull compensation with your fills, your push at the ends. The wider the satin, it kind of gives you more leeway on your room for error with the fills pulling in or pushing out. A nice bold satin is going to cover up any mistakes or any extra compensation that you're lacking or you have too much of. So, um, but yeah, I'd say 2 to 3 and something like this. Filling all at 15, 20 degrees.
I might push 4, just depending.
Yeah,
Like Justin says, it really depends because sometimes if you start putting too thick of borders on there, it covers the fill completely in certain junctions.
right. And I think it looks kind of odd where the end result is you have the fill showing is barely 3 millimeters wide, and then you have these really thick, big, bold letters or outlines. It kind of looks weird to me. It looks unbalanced. Then you start getting into, like I said, in the word industrial here, you have that small little area of the inside of the a little bit bigger on the inside of that R, but you started making those satins too wide, it's going to really bleed into those areas. It's either going to completely close it up like the inside of the A, and or having to have it close up that much, you might start tearing the material itself if those needle penetrations are too close to each other, depending on the material itself. So
Yeah,
um,
and I see a lot of times it's. I know it's on my checklist when people send me art, and I know it's on Justin's. Not all the time you get that. This is going on a. I have in the past gotten this is going on a hat, a left chest, workwear, dry fit polo. Like they try to hit everything in one order,
right,
and it's kind of like, well, okay, so it's a file for this, and a file for that, and a file for that, and a file for that, and sometimes those minor adjustments that they can be less than minor adjustments, especially. If I told Justin if I asked him for this and said this is going on a Carhartt jacket, right? He's going to throw down some settings versus if I said, Justin, this is going on a really plush, foofy sweatshirt,
right,
right? And we're trying to talk the extremes here, but there's going to be a lot more push and pull that's going to happen on a floofy sweatshirt than there is going to be on a Carhartt jacket. And so now he's going to go in and he's going to change the amount of overlaps, and he's probably going to trim the fills to account for the push and pull to stop it from coming out on that sweatshirt versus, you don't necessarily have to do that on a
and
Carhartt.
and that's a good point too, where utilizing, there's that balance where if someone says like, "Oh, I need this for a jacket at 9 inches wide and a safety vest at 7.5 inches wide," I could pretty much know that digitizing it the same way, or even using the stock text and kind of going through the steps of converting it to a fill and a satin border, more than likely with that amount of change, I can use the same style of digitizing, fill with a satin border. It's just a matter of now scaling it down a little bit, and like you said, and or maybe adding some density, different underlay, more pull comp or whatever it may be. But if someone were to come to you and say, "I need this safety on the back of a Carhartt jacket," uh, full front of a sweatshirt, so maybe it's a little bit smaller for full front of the sweatshirt next to a hat. So now I'm going to look at it as well. In essence, that's two completely different logos, because the front and the back of the sweatshirt and jacket I am going to go fill with a satin border. On a hat, I'm going to more than likely just going to go straight satin stitches. So
Justin, I accidentally muted you. We're not going to talk about that. I had to cough, and I thought I'm just going to mute myself so I won't cough over Justin. I muted him too. It's one of those days. I'm sorry, everybody. And Justin's still muted. This is great. You have to unmute. Let me send you a request to unmute.
Right as you said that, I saw that it was saying that I needed to unmute. So
It's one of those. I'm sorry, everybody. Justin, you were saying.
I was saying, so I don't know how much you got that, but in essence, it turns into two different logos. So digitizing in something large where I'm going with a fill with a satin border next to a hat where it's going to be just regular satin stitches. Yes, it may be the exact same logo, quote unquote. It looks exactly the same as far as the artwork, but it's going to be digitized in two different ways. So, um, like Cindy said, yeah, me trying to get two for one price. As a digitizer, as much as I can for my customers, if I'm just making a quick little change between two different uh, materials or two different applications, I don't charge for something like that. Um,
Yeah. It depends on the amount of time that it takes to make that edit request. I mean,
exactly.
ultimately, if I send a logo to Justin and it's 1 millimeter tall, sorry, 1 millimeter wide text, 5 millimeters tall, and it's going across the front of the hat, I say, Justin, can you scale this down to me another inch? I have a feeling I'm probably going to be paying for that.
Right.
Because that's a lot of work to readjust that to go down that much further versus if it's 2 millimeters wide and I say, Justin, can you scale this down for me to 1 millimeter wide? It's more than likely going to be a quick scale and an underlay change, and it's going to take him 5 minutes, and I'm not going to get charged for that. Or if I say,
Yeah.
can you throw this on a sweatshirt instead of a hat, I'm going to get an underlay change, and out it goes. So it really depends on how much time and effort goes into actually making that change, because I've had people send me change requests and it's a complete rework, or it's 45 minutes worth of work just to get that to the change that they want, and I have to charge for that.
Yeah, to me, it's the way I classify it. It's an edit next to a revision. An edit is something I could just quickly change something for you, make an adjustment, boom, here's your file. A revision is where I have to go in and actually redigitize a portion of it or redo something in the design where I'm actually changing elements in the design. So I was going to say something and lost my train of thought. That's why a lot of times, like if a customer is coming to me saying I need this for a hat and left chest, uh, barring that you're not specifically wanting the design in two different sizes, a lot of times the size of the design on a hat would work for a left chest, as well as if I know I'm digitizing it for a hat, it's going to work for a left chest for the most part. So you may be getting one design from me if you're asking for those two different things. Now there are times where that the case of something that's specific isn't that way, and I would of course give you two different designs. So, um, but yeah, as far as the satins, um, the 3D puff is where you really try to kind of push your limits when it comes to the width of a satin. You also the benefit, or not the benefit, but the reason why I think you can get away with wider satins. Not only is it on a hat where typically it's not laundered or, like I said, rubbing on something as you're driving or something, um, but you also have the foam itself that's putting pressure on the backside of those stitches. So the level of density that you need for 3D puff, as well as the foam giving you that structure, um, it's going to be hard to kind of really snag those stitches. You'd have to get in there with some scissors or something pointy
I
to
could do that.
try to get them out.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have the added benefit, I guess is what I'm saying, is the foam that's really kind of give you that structure. Um,
I mean, I think the goal here is that everybody wants, you always want that long, beautiful, you get that lustrous, shiny reflect that you get with satin stitches,
right.
but and you can run really long stitches on a garment like this, but we also want whatever we give to our customers to last them the 10 years that they're going to use it, or the 5 years, and it's not going to get all torn up and looping. And we want rugged embroidery as well as beautiful embroidery.
Exactly. And you do, like, if I this is something that we kind of see every year over the last month is a big season for it, but graduation stoles. And a
Yep.
lot of times they'll have, either their names stacked down, they want something really big so, parents and grandparents can see it on stage. But materials like that, it's not, again, not only is it the problems that you see in these with the looping and whatnot, but having those really wide satin stitches that are pulling on those type of materials that those satin, typically satin stoles are made out of, they really pull in and pucker the material.
Yep.
So I know that the kind of the general idea is putting less stitches on materials that pucker, and adding a fill stitch is going to, of course, add more stitches. But when you're flattening it out, and you don't need a ton of density to get coverage on that nice smooth material, you can play with your densities, you can play with your stitch lengths, but as long as you have kind of that flatter stitch that you put a tatami underlay underneath, it's gonna not pucker as much, even though you are technically adding more stitches to it.
Right. I mean, you got to think of it like you're building a bridge. You're either pulling from 2 points that are really wide out here, and you're pulling into the center, and it's going to fold a little bit,
Right.
versus you're putting 4 points, and each of those 4 points, and it's going to pull flat,
Right.
pull more pressure across your stabilizer, versus your stabilizer just going to want to buckle underneath.
Exactly.
Now, so we have a question here from Doug. He says, "How wide is your guideline for a satin stitch?"
So just keeping it as a satin stitch. So I'm going to throw out the old, it depends. Um, I would, before I even start thinking about going into the realm of adding some type of fill, I'm usually right around the 8 or 9 millimeters wide. But that can change by the garment. Like we were just talking about the stoles. Uh, 8 or 9 millimeter can definitely start puckering those stoles. So you may want to start looking into using that complex turning fill, loosening up your density a little bit, using a longer stitch length so you're not hammering the amount of fill stitches in there. But it's like you said, it's building that bridge where you're not just pulling it in from 2 points. You're kind of stair stepping your way across the material.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that when you look at general guidelines, it's like 7 millimeters wide if you're going to be on the back of a garment that's going to
Mhm.
get some abrasion, and then going up over that, you're going to want to start kind of breaking it up. I know I'm more in the line of what Justin does, though. 8 9 millimeters, I start looking at it, especially that big 10 millimeter mark.
Mhm.
Because that's generally when the machine, depending on the machine, but most of the time that's when the machines start throwing that chunk.
Yep.
And I don't like that sound.
I
And
don't either.
so, and I know it's not great for production, so it can be a trade off when you start looking at that. So usually I'm around 8 or 9. I know 7 is kind of like if I'm going on a jacket back that I know is going to get abraded, I'll stay kind of be below there. So Doug again asks, I think he's probably working on a graduation stole. Can you use tatami underlay or fill below satin for the graduation stoles?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily do a fill underneath a satin because you're just adding more stitches. Why not just stick with the fill stitch and leave it at that? Um, I have seen where not only it's satin stoles, but kind of using a general global underlay when it comes to the thinner materials. You still don't want to use really wide satins because even though you are kind of using that global underlay or a tatami underlay, those wide satins really want to pull on the material. There's a lot of
Yep.
tension there.
I know it's. I want to say it's Lee Caroselli who's like the long who when she teaches the longer the stitch length, the more it pulls,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's probably the simplest I've ever heard it put. The longer your stitch length, the more it's going to pull.
Right.
Um, So I'm going to pull up this one here. It's from DJ Kev. With those satin stoles, do you slow your machine down, Justin?
I've never felt that I needed to.
All right, I'll disagree. I'll slow my machine down and I'll lighten my tension maybe a little bit.
Yeah, the
Um,
tension for sure. Again, given I don't run my machines like other people do. People think speed for everything and they crank it up as fast as they can go on their machines.
yep.
So generally, depending on what we're running, we're anywhere from 750 to 850 is average.
See, and I'll pull down to like 600 on a stole.
600.
Just and I'll lighten the tension just a little bit, but that's versus I like to run around 900 to 1,000. So I do lighten up my tension and I slow it down a little bit. And I'm just going to pull this up here because I agree. Lee is an excellent teacher. She is a fantastic teacher. She
Yes.
really knows her stuff. But yeah, I tend to lighten up my tensions just a little bit, and I like to lower the
speed.
Just a little bit. It's the same thing. Like if you're working with really fine text on anytime you slow your machine down, it's gonna help a little bit. It's gonna just allow it to settle a little bit faster before that needle comes down. But it becomes a balance then, because it's like, okay, well, I can slow my machine down to 200 stitches per minute, and this can take 9 hours.
Right.
Or I can run my machine at 900 stitches a minute, and how much is that really gonna affect, right?
And stuff like that too. I think it really does depend on the machine as well.
Yeah.
I've seen some machines that are just so better when they're running slower.
Yeah. I've seen some machines that sew better when they run faster.
Yeah. From brand to brand, even model to model, how old one machine is next to the other, how well it's maintained, all those factors. So I think the sweet spot when it comes to speed is you're really gonna have to do trial and error with your machine.
Yeah.
Like
I will point out that while machines can run at top speed all the time, constantly, that I got a car that can drive 100 miles an hour and I don't floor it all the time. Like I want my engine to last a little, you'll get a lot more wear. You're running it faster, but these new machines, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 stitches per minute, that's incredibly fast, and I'm not sure if I'd run them that fast all the time.
Right.
But let's see. Oh, hold on. Here we go. Cindy says customers have to know there are a limit to what you can put on a stole. I don't change anything when I run my stoles. 800 is my speed for most everything. So yeah, 800 is it's a nice speed. I don't know if I would go off too far from that. And Doug says here, I do a lot of leather and slow it down to about 750. So it's probably, I don't know if that's because he's pushing into a thicker material. But all of that, it plays into each other, because I've seen machines that to run a hat without breaking a needle, you have to run to 500 stitches a minute.
Right. Exactly.
But I've also seen machines that you can run 1,000 stitches a minute on a hat and there are no issues. So yeah. It can kind of vary, and maintenance comes into a lot of it. I think maintenance, age, machine type,
how much all those moving parts have moved too much.
Yeah. And if you guys missed it, last live was Justin maintaining his Tajima. I heard that was fun.
Yeah. It wasn't maintaining, it was actually a repair. This was if you didn't follow us on social media, I had different parts where I was diagnosing and going through and trying to find where the problem was, and then finally I recorded the whole repair where I had to get into one of those pressure fit cams and cut it off the machine. So it was fun though. I learned a lot of what's behind the backside of my the cover to my head.
Let me ask this: was this one of those repairs that you looked at and you go, maybe I should just bring it in tech?
I had the conversation with the tech on the phone from Tajima. He sent me a video. He explained to me, and he even kind of said, like, you get to these points, if you don't feel comfortable, leave it alone, call your tech.
Stop here. Like good stopping points. Just stop here. Yeah.
So yeah, there was cutting the cam off and not damaging everything around it is kind of where I was kind of,
That could be nerve wracking.
yeah. Luckily, I got the right tool, zipped right through it, got it off. So, and it actually sparked um, kind of a good lesson to see how much behind the head that you actually have to remove covers off to get to grease to oil.
Yep.
Those instructions that come in the machines, those ones that are every 3 months, quarterly, yearly.
Pack it in here.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
it's stuff that people get busy, you forget about. It was a good time to say, hey, let's take all the covers off. Let's get behind these. Let's really get into these machines. And actually had one of my operators, after I showed him where everything was, he took a machine every day and kind of went behind everything. And
I thought you were talking about the
if that's funny.
I mean, that could play into it too, I guess. No.
Yeah, there's a factor right there.
All right, guys. Well, I'll go ahead and we can end this out here. If you guys haven't checked us out, if you can check us out over on YouTube. You can also check us out on our Facebook group, The Embroidery Nerd, as well as our page, The Embroidery Nerd. You can follow us on Instagram under EMB Nerd. You can join our Discord. I want to say you can get to that from links.embnerd.com. You can find us from all over from there, and join our conversation and have a ball. But I don't know if we have any announcements. We've got the book Punch for sale still. We still have some in stock. So if you guys are interested in learning more from Bonnie Nilsson, she's going to be coming back on and doing another live with us on another topic, which is really exciting. I'm not 100% sure when she's going to be able to do that, but I know that that's coming up, as well as we're going to get Britta from ZSK
Nice.
on a live with us as well. So I'm excited for that as well. But those are the few things that we've got coming up. Anything you got coming up, Justin?
Nothing coming up anytime soon. So, but yeah, we definitely have those. Looking forward to those interviews and having those people in. They're great educators themselves, and they should be a lot of fun.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, with that, I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We have Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. We're both here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we will catch you next time.